one ETH token will be worth at least $10,000 by the end of this cycle. And in this video, I will be explaining why that is. So if you're in ETH or interested in the implications this will have in altcoin season, make sure to stick around and watch until the end. Now, with ETH having recently made new cycle highs, finally breaking above 4K and holding, a lot of people are now jumping on the ETH bandwagon, saying ETH is great, when not so long ago, literally maybe 2 months ago, ETH hate was at the highest extreme I've ever seen it in my 8 years of crypto. And what's so amazing is that those people who are fighting ETH at 1500 and lower will now slowly start to say that ETH is great and pretend like they didn't leave a lot of people out of one of the easiest trades this cycle. I, for one, however, was a very bullish ETH this entire year, and I have a ton of evidence to show for that, so that no one can say that I'm just now starting to turn bullish on ETH, because that is the popular idea. For example, I have a series of tweets to show for that. Back in early February, when we had that collapse in crypto, I had stated that the prospects of a 200k Bitcoin and a 10k ETH, literally the target we are mentioning in this video, is something that we were looking at since back then. This was when ETH collapsed to 2k, having failed to get above 4k for the third time. And I'll be explaining why I had such high conviction at that time to say this, as that price structure I believed was going to pan out is now happening. We'll get to that in a second. Another tweet I put out in January, when things were looking really bad, was probably one of the best tweets I've ever made. So if you're not following me on Twitter, I will leave a link to it in the description at Pain of Crypto. But this was sort of the first time I commented on ETH and ETH Bitcoin. I never really talked about ETH last year or the year before, but this year I really began talking about it. And the idea was, as you can see by this comment here, ETH will save your cycle, which I think we're in the middle of right now. And that was based on the idea that ETH Bitcoin still had to bottom. And so that the pumps we were seeing in Bitcoin at that time, first up to 74k and then 108k, followed by those altcoin rallies, the reason those altcoin rallies didn't really materialize into anything is because ETH wasn't ready at that time, as ETH Bitcoin still had the bottom. And so where everyone was hating on ETH, for me, after that ETH Bitcoin bottom, ETH was what was going to act as the anchor to allow for an altcoin season. And I think we're in the middle of that happening right now, about 7-8 months later. I think it's happening right now. And then again in May, doubling down on that idea that ETH will save your cycle, as during this time ETH Bitcoin was very close to a bottom, and the cope of basically saying that, hey, when ETH got to 1400, you literally could have full ported it, made the easiest, safest 3 to 5x in your life, and yet instead you said it's not worth it. And you may also be saying, well, Payne, if you're such a smart guy, why didn't you give ETH at those lows? But I did. Back on March 17th, I gave those targets of a 10k ETH, saying something like that was on the table. And for reference, back on March 17th, ETH was in the gutters at the lows of 1800, where with these lows, we were targeting as low as 1400, hoping for then a rally, a fifth wave up to at least 8 to 10k. Again, this was all on March 17th, and lo and behold, ETH bottomed at 1400, where we are now in that process of getting up to 8 to 10k on the lower end, in my opinion. So all of this is playing out to the T. No one else is giving these calls, quite frankly. Now that this price structure has played out, I can give it to you all. This is called the expanding ending diagonal in Elliott wave theory, or short form for EED. Now, as you can see in the purple on this post that I gave to my Discord, this is a Elliott wave count for this cycle. But then in the blue, we have an Elliott wave count for ETH since the past decade. The fifth of the EED is a pretty popular way to end the fifth of a macro cycle. And so if ETH, along with Bitcoin, has been in a macro decade-long cycle, then this cycle, the purple, would have been the fifth. And so the fifth of the fifth would have been one of the few explanations and ways for ETH to have this type of sloppy price action and still finish bullish, where it's kind of ranging. There's no real difference between where we initially impulsed off of and the 4, but then the fifth goes crazy. And so I posted this EED idea in my Discord and forced a lot of people that were heavy in Bitcoin at this time to rotate into ETH, because this type of price action formation also would have coincided with the bottom formation of ETH Bitcoin. And so now, after nailing that bottom, this is how that updated EED Elliott wave formation looks. I have not changed it since that post, and so far it's following the purple. I mean, you can see how close that is. There will be some small chop and dips along the way. The way I see it, with ETH Bitcoin having bottomed, this is heading for all-time highs fairly soon, and then price discovery and that 10K target eventually. So with all that ETH hate, turns out that ETH was going to save our cycle. I think that's happening. Now, if you are someone who wants help like this, access to this type of information before it occurs, then make sure to join the Discord. There's not much time left. Now is not the time to mess around. There are a lot of plays on the table. If you think you've been left behind, that's not the case. There's many opportunities brewing right now with different altcoins. As remember, for this channel, for the longest time, we've been saying an altcoin season will happen. Just like how they were very confident to call ETH dead, and now that recovered, the same way they'll be wrong about their writing off of an altcoin season. So again, if you're interested, there is a link in the description to join the Discord. I'm giving a bunch of calls for that final run and altcoin season where they will pan out profitable like this. There's also the paying edition where you get one-on-one messaging and calls with me if you feel like you need individual help, some type of hand holding to reach your goals. So again, check that out if you're interested. Here is an example of how it looks in there. This is the final run channel, just one of many. I've blurred out the coins obviously and the entries for them, and then the link to the different sources for my thesis on these coins. Again, if you want these picks, they are in the Discord. Now, aside from the price structure and why I think this is a strong reason that ETH hits 10K, another big reason has to do with the ETH Bitcoin chart. Now, if you look at ETH Bitcoin, structurally, ETH looks very weak against Bitcoin. As you can see, the fall off from the 2021 peak, so how strong and how much gainage there was of ETH against Bitcoin, was monumentally off of where it peaked in 2017. So inherently, ETH is weak against Bitcoin. To be fair, if ETH Bitcoin has bottomed, which I think is quite fair, like Ben Cowan often says, even though ETH is making lower highs, it's also making higher lows. By the skin of its teeth, but it has made a higher low. So now the question is, where does ETH Bitcoin top this cycle? I think a 0.05 top for ETH Bitcoin this 2025 cycle is more than fair. In fact, it's kind of bearish. For the longevity of ETH, it would be very bad. But here is a couple reasons I think we could top there in a very conservative manner. In fact, like it's bearish. It should get here at the very least, 0.05. First is 0.05 within itself is quite the significant psychological level. As you can see, it acted as support and resistance multiple times. Over here, this big bounce, and then this support before it ultimately gave out. It's now going to act as some pretty big resistance. Psychologically, 0.05 is something that stands out as well. More importantly, we can form the bias that the top will be a lower high yet again. So anything over the 2021 peak is sort of off the table. So we know that ETH Bitcoin has to be less than 0.088 this cycle. So this is the range we're playing with, 0.088 and the current low at 0.017, let's call it. The peak of 2021 was about 44% down from the peak of 2017. A minus 44% decline from the 2021 peak would put it at, oddly enough, 0.05. So that stands out quite a bit. Also, if you take a fib retracement from the peak of 2017 to the bottom of ETH Bitcoin in the bear market in 2019, the 2021 peak then reached the 0.5 level. If we play out that same pattern now, the top from 2021 to the bottom of this bear market, although we've been in a bull market, but for the sake of ETH Bitcoin, 0.05 comes in again and gives us a valuation of around 0.05 for ETH Bitcoin. So a lot of confluence in that area. So what does that all mean in terms of the math? Well, if one Bitcoin is 120K, which it is right now, and we can assume Bitcoin will be at least 120K by the time ETH Bitcoin hits that top at 0.05. That means one ETH will be worth 6 grand. But it's quite likely that by the time ETH Bitcoin tops, the valuation of Bitcoin will probably be higher, maybe something around 140, 150K. Well, if one Bitcoin is 150K and ETH Bitcoin hits that conservative top of 0.05, that means one ETH will be worth 7.5K. And I believe around 6 to 7.5K is what Ben Cowan is targeting for ETH USD. So that checks out in my opinion as well. For one ETH to be 10k along with a 0.05 ETH Bitcoin valuation, that means Bitcoin would need to be 200k. Now 200k sounds quite up there, but if you've been watching a lot of my recent videos, if you haven't, I highly recommend to watch them and make sure you're subscribed because you don't want to miss this type of content. We will be posting a lot more often to end off this cycle. I think Bitcoin hits at least 150 to 200k. So by default, I guess that would mean that my ETH targets have to be at least 7.5k to 10k. And going back to that original tweet I put out in February, that is sort of where it stems from. That a 200k Bitcoin and a 10k ETH are on the table this cycle. During that time, it seemed like crazy talk. Now I think people see the method to the madness. Overall though, the main takeaway message is that the sky is blue, the grass is green. Everyone can point out the obvious. If something like an ETH is bleeding to sub 2k, I don't care about your opinion and for you to tell me that ETH is dead. What does that mean? I can see that. You should be looking for and following and listening to those who give more. I don't need you to tell me an asset is going up or down. What's the play? Is it a buy or not? To me it was. It's now happening. ETH will hit 10k this cycle. Again, make sure you're subscribed for more content like this. I highly recommend it. And take care. I will see you all very soon.